Battle Royale. This is the newest survival game mode that has taken the gaming world by storm. Like it or not, you probably have at least played a round or two of PUBG or Fortnite. But what makes these games the most popular games in the industry right now? It's because of the thrill that it gives you. Getting down to the final 10 players while the circle is closing in on everyone gives you a feeling that few games can replicate. It makes you nervous, excited, and determined all at the same time. Even though it seems like everyone is playing these games right now, either on PC, console, or mobile, it just doesn't draw me in like some of the other multiplayer shooters. It takes a really unique shooter for me to get sucked into it and want to play it non-stop. The ones that were actually able to suck me in were Left 4 Dead 2 and Titanfall 2. Left 4 Dead 2 had a fast-paced gameplay that kept you on your toes, while also creating a looming fear that an infected was waiting right around the corner for you. With Titanfall 2, it's a fast-paced shooter that moves at breakneck speeds, with wall running and giant titans. I mostly played it with coworkers, but the interesting game modes and the ability to pilot a 20-foot titan definitely helped the game from getting stale too quickly. Both of these games are fantastic, but I would have to say that my favorite multiplayer shooter has to be Splatoon 2. The main objective of Splatoon 2 is completely different from any other shooter that I have played before. Your goal is to cover the map in the color of your ink, while the enemy tries to do the same in the game mode called Turf War. Whoever has the most amount of ink covering the map at the end of the match wins. You don't have to go hunt the other players in this game, and this is the reason why I love it so much. Sometimes I just want to shut my brain off and paint the town red, or in this case pink. But with every multiplayer shooter, there will always be players whose only goal is to splat you. Now that the game has been out for a while, I'm finding myself in matches that have high-leveled players only looking to keep you within the confines of your base, which is making Turf War incredibly unfun. Once this happened, I decided to try out the new game mode that was introduced in the sequel called Salmon Run. Salmon Run is a survival game mode where you fight 3 waves of enemies, and after each wave, more and more enemies show up, resulting in a controlled chaos of both players and enemies on screen. I absolutely love this game mode because you actually have to work together in order to make it to the next round. You don't have to worry about someone else being better than you, and that's why I wanted to do a video on this game mode. Since not everyone has played Salmon Run, I'll be covering 3 things for this game mode: what makes Salmon Run a unique survival mode, how a typical match plays out, and what Salmon Run is doing to reinvigorate the survival mode. Before we look at what makes Salmon Run such a one-of-a-kind survival mode, we first have to look at what a survival mode usually is. Survival mode is sometimes called Horde mode, which is about surviving for as long as possible against endless waves of increasingly difficult enemies. A lot of tower defense games like Sanctum and Dungeon Defenders tend to use this model of endless waves of enemies, but I'm only going to be looking at the shooter genre in this video. The game mode that uses this model of endless waves of enemies, but actually puts a creative spin on it, is Left 4 Dead 2. It's called Scavenge mode, and it features a group of 4 players trying to collect enough gas cans in order to fuel up a car to escape with. Enemies are still trying to take you out, and occasionally a tank will show up to really wreck your day. Even though this game mode is very similar to Salmon Run does a better job of keeping the player from getting frustrated. Instead of it being an all or nothing type game mode like in Left 4 Dead, Salmon Run gives you a reward for how many eggs you collected, even if your crew gets wiped that round. You get that feeling that you are getting better with each round instead of just pass or fail with Left 4 Dead. I just want to say that there's nothing wrong with the way Left 4 Dead does it, but sometimes a little reward just goes a long way with keeping you engaged with the game. Now that I've talked about some of the other survival shooter games, let's see what makes Salmon Run a unique survival mode. In Salmon Run, you play as the usual Inkling and are employed by Mr. Grizz of Grizzco Industries. Yeah, that's him. Your job is to collect both power eggs and golden eggs, which are obtained by defeating salmonids. But the golden eggs are the main item you're going after, while the power eggs serve as currency for you to use to upgrade your gear outside of the battle. During each Salmon Run, there are 3 waves of enemies, and the main objective is to deposit the golden eggs into the egg basket that is usually stationed near the middle of the map. The golden eggs are dropped by defeating the multiple types of boss salmonids, and you can only carry 1 egg at a time until you deposit it into the egg basket. Each one of these bosses tries to splat you in a different way, and each one also has a different weakness than the next. But the bosses aren't the only things you have to worry about in Salmon Run. There are also various types of special waves called known occurrences, with the most common ones being the shifting tide. Each time a round starts, the tide can change to a high tide, a normal tide, or a low tide. High tide restricts the map to an insanely small portion that gives you quite a challenge with trying to survive that round. The normal tide is just the regular map, and the low tide reveals a new area of the map that is a lot more open space for you to move around more freely in. You also use the weapons and specials from the regular multiplayer, but the weapons are limited to 4 types per day, and you are given a different one each round. That forces you to try to get familiar with different weapons that you normally wouldn't use in regular multiplayer. This game mode has so many different variables that can take effect during a single match. You have 4 maps, 3 water levels, 6 known occurrences, 10 different types of salmonids, 43 different weapons, and 4 specials that are all different each and every match. This large mixture of variables keeps you excited to see what is going to happen next, and that helps the game mode from getting stale. And now a small briefing on how a typical Salmon Run match goes. All 4 players start in the middle of the map and have 10 seconds before the first wave starts. That time is usually spent covering as much of the map as possible, but as soon as that wave starts, you start looking for what part of the ocean the salmonids are coming from. The further you get into the waves, the more enemies start spawning, especially boss salmonids. After you splat these bosses and they drop their eggs, you race back to the basket in order to secure the eggs you need to collect. You do all this while having a different weapon and a different known occurrence thrown your way each wave. Let me just say, if it's wave 3 and you have high tide, you're going to get overwhelmed extremely easy, and I very rarely make it out of those rounds alive. It sounds so basic written down, but once you're in the thick of it and you don't know what's going to happen next, that's when you realize just how unique this game mode is. You can also notice the ways Nintendo made their survival mode accessible to anyone. In Salmon Run, if someone tries to go off on their own and gets splatted, you have a chance of reviving them just by shooting them. In Scavenge mode, if someone breaks off from the group and gets pounced by a hunter, you may not be able to get to them in time, and then you are down a teammate. This just frustrates everyone on the survivor's side and doesn't help you with achieving the final goal, which is surviving. And that leads me to the reason why I love Salmon Run so much. It's because it promotes teamwork. With Salmon Run, you never feel that if you break away from the group, you might be hindering them. Since you know you can always be revived, this leads you, the player, to experiment more and try riskier moves so you can learn how to get better at the game. But how does Salmon Run get everyone to work together even though you get matched with random people? It's because of the objective. There is another objective present that just isn't trying to stay alive. Everyone knows that they have to bring the eggs back to the basket in order to move on to the next round. It's such a simple way of getting everyone to work together without having to have full communication with your teammates. I was extremely excited to see that Nintendo decided to add an entirely new game mode to Splatoon 2, and they could have easily just ported the original one to the Switch. Salmon Run is the type of survival mode that I can only see Nintendo being able to pull off. Not only is it a fun game mode, it is something unique and different in a crowd of everyone trying to copy one another. The only downside to this amazing game mode is that it's only available at certain times. You can't just start up the game and expect to be able to play Salmon Run at any time you want. The schedule that is on is incredibly frustrating, especially with the news that hackers are using overly powerful modded weapons in regular multiplayer mode. Sometimes I just want to play cooperative instead of competitive, and with this giant gate blocking me, I can't do that right now. Anyway, Salmon Run has shown me that a survival mode can keep me engaged as long as there is an objective other than just surviving. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm JoystickDrummer, and I'll see you next time.